Prime Minister Alan Chastanet is seeking to allay the fears of the populace in the wake of an increase in cases of the novel coronavirus. The number of COVID-19 patients jumped from 27 to 63 in 3 weeks. Chastanet phoned into the hit mid-morning variety show Out Goes In on Radio 100 Helen FM on Tuesday. While attempting to temper the anxieties of citizens, he had plaudits for St. Lucians, who heeded the advice of health authorities with the hosting of a very subdued Journée Creole celebration.
We showed in the first round that we did extremely well by only having 27 cases and knock on wood, no one had died. And now we've also shown that we can coexist with COVID. We know that COVID is not a plague. We know that if you wear your mask, you hand sanitize, you practice social distancing, you can significantly reduce your risk. And I really just wanted to congratulate St. Lucians over this weekend. The strength that they showed was just really remarkable, because we all know how important Journée Creole is to us culturally, and it was made even that much more important because we didn't have Carnival this year. And for St. Lucians to have reacted as quickly as they did and to conducted themselves the way that they did over the weekend is really admirable.
Chastanet has consistently argued that a perpetual lockdown is inconceivable given the economic cost and resource constraints of the state. Instead, he continues to frame the pandemic response as a simultaneous effort underpinned by public health protection and economic preservation. But Chastanet believes this can only be done observing COVID-19 regulations and protocols.
This idea where we can trade off healthcare and economics, healthcare will always be more important because you cannot replace a person's life. But at the same time, we're realizing that if we're disciplined and we do the right things, we can coexist, and we don't have to threaten people's lives. But we also must be mindful of the economic situation.
Chastanet told the Out Goes In crew that he is not surprised by the recent surge in cases. He explains that given the nature of the pandemic, a rise in numbers was expected, and the recent uptick in patients must be put into perspective given the testing, contact tracing, and quarantine efforts of public health authorities.
The moment that we start seeing that the vast majority of new cases are persons who are already in quarantine, it tells us that we're starting to get ahead of the situation. We still have some cases coming in which persons were not quarantined, and we always have to be worried about that. And what we want to do is to make sure 100% of the new cases are always persons who are already in quarantine, because that means that we anticipated it and that we had minimized the ability for them to be able to spread. And just to also say to St. Lucians, not to be scared of the numbers. We can get overwhelmed by the number of new cases, but this was going to happen. I mean, the fact is Martinique and Guadeloupe saw a huge number in increases in cases over the last 2 weeks. We've seen a rise in the other islands, and therefore being part of that ecosystem, we were always going to be susceptible.
But what happens if the cases continue to go up? Will the government reimpose a curfew? The Prime Minister hints that legislatively this would be unlikely as the government pivots to reopening communities and the economy. Chastanet explains, though the authorities remain vigilant, he prefers social consent instead of draconian methods to mitigate the spread.
So as long as we can continue to see persons following those protocols by themselves, then it would not be necessary to put in the regulations to do that. But certainly we're going to continue to watch the situation. I'm being advised by the Ministry of Health. I'm also cognizant of the resources, and I think that that's the part that many persons forget. You know, in opening up the country, why we did it in stages is because the police officers did not have the resources to open up the country entirely at the first instance. And we need a certain amount of self-regulation. And that self-regulation also comes down on an individual basis, Andre. We must do it for ourselves. We must want to live. We must want to protect ourselves. We must want to protect our family members. We must want to protect the more vulnerable people in our society.
The Prime Minister made a case for putting masks on, hand sanitizing, physical distancing and less socializing in the coming weeks. He claims this would be a small price to pay to keep citizens and compatriots, especially those with pre-existing conditions which increase the severity of illness, safe during this rough patch of the pandemic. Colby DeVoe, HTS News Force.